For this video, we're going to take a look at writing linear equations. So just a couple of quick things. With this, we want to get to the point where we can write an equation, the equation of a line given any information. So we do have a couple forms. We have slope-intercept, which is y equals mx plus b. We have standard form, which is the ax plus by equals c. And then we have the point slope form, which is y minus the y value of your point equals the slope times x minus the x value of your point. All of those forms we looked at in last night's video, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. But what we are going to do today is take a look at different information that we could be given and try to write the equation. So if we start out, the slope and y-intercept. If we're given the slope and the y-intercept, then the form that kind of screams to me would be slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. Now, if we're given the slope is 1/3 and the y-intercept is -5, we can go right ahead and plug in what we know. We know the slope is 1/3 and the y-intercept is a -5, and then we've written the equation of that line given the slope and the y-intercept, and that's probably the easiest way to write that. Now the next one is if you're given a line in standard form. A lot of people tend to not prefer standard form. So if we are given a line in standard form and you'd rather have that in a different form, I just want to make sure that you're okay with moving things around. Coming into geometry, most people tend to prefer slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. So if that is something that you prefer and you're given an equation in standard form, you can always move things around. The goal would be to get the y by itself and everything else on the other side. So here's my y. So I'm going to take my 4x and try to move that to the other side by subtracting it. When I do that, I'm left with a -2y, and on the other side I have a -4x and a +14. And now I still don't have y by itself. It has a -2 attached to it. So I'm just going to go through and divide everything by -2. And so I get y equals, this is a +2 here, and then I get a -7. So given standard form, it's pretty easy to write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form. You just have to know how to move things around. All right, if we're given a graph, really you want to pick out a couple of things. You want to pick out the slope, definitely, and then either pick out the y-intercept or just one point on the line. So with this line, in order to find the slope, you want to pick out two good points. So I see a good point there and a good point there. And remember that slope is rise over run, so to go from the point on the left to the point on the right, now I always tell people to read a line like you read a book, going from left to right. So going from left to right, we're going to rise, not up, but down 2 units, and then we're going to run to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. So our slope is moving down 2 units and to the right +5 units. So our slope is -2/5. And now they give us a point here on the line. They give us a point on the y-axis actually, so that's our y-intercept, which is -1. So right away we can write the equation of the line in slope-intercept form, which again is the y equals mx plus b form. So with this one, we know that our slope is -2/5, and we know that it crosses the y-axis at -1. All right, if we're given a point and a slope, point-slope form is the form that kind of screams at me anyway. And so point-slope form is y minus the y value from the point that you know, and then that's equal to the slope times x minus the x value of the point that we know. And so we're given a point here, -1, 3, and we're given a slope of -3. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug in what I know. Y minus the y value of my point, which would be 3, and then that's going to equal the slope times x minus the x value of my point, which is -1. And so now I can clean that up a little bit because I have y minus 3 equals -3 times x minus a -1, and minus a negative is really just plus. Now remember, in the video last night we talked a little bit about how if you see a -3 in the equation, you pull it out as a positive 3. And if you see a positive 1, you pull it out as a negative 1. So when you're looking at the equation, you have to change those signs to actually get your point. Now, again, if point slope isn't a method that you prefer, if you don't like point slope, you could change things around and get y by itself here. But for me, this form right here is perfectly fine. I can find my slope, I can find a point that's on that line, and I can graph that pretty quickly. But we can, so this is an okay method, that's point slope form, but we can go ahead and we can clean this up. We can distribute the negative 3, and we can take that 3 and move it to the other side to get the y by itself. And when we do that, we'd have y equals negative 3x minus 3 and then plus 3. And so we just get y equals negative 3x. So that's another perfectly fine equation of a line. That would be slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, and this would be point-slope form. Either one is acceptable. All right, if we're given 2 points, the first thing that we have to do is find the slope. And then again, we have to figure out if we're going to use slope-intercept form or point-slope form. With this one, if my slope is, if I'm trying to find the slope between these 2 points, remember to find slope, your formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, rise over run. And so if we go ahead and we plug in here, I'm just going to scooch this up a little bit. If we plug in here, I'm going to call this my first point and this my second point. So my second y value is negative 13. Minus my first value, which is negative 7, over my second x value, which is 8, minus my first x value, which is negative 4. And then I'm just going to clean up those double negatives into plus signs. And so really here I end up with negative 13 plus 7, which is 6. Negative 6. And then on the bottom I have 8 plus 4, which is 12. And so that becomes a negative 1/2. So the slope of this line is going to be negative 1/2. Now, they give me 2 points. So right away I could just use point slope. I know that I have y minus a y value from one of my points, and that's going to equal my slope times x minus an x value from one of my points. And so now if I look, I'm just going to pick one of my points, it doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to plug in the y value from that point. I'm going to plug in the slope, which we found was negative 1/2, and then I'm going to plug in the the x value from that point. And then I'm just going to go ahead and clean up those double negatives. And so now I have the equation of the line in point slope form. And again, if you don't like the equation in point slope form, you could clean it up, you could distribute, you could move the 7 to the other side and get the equation into slope-intercept form. However, I would really like you to start being able to deal with the equation of a line in that form because it does make your life a lot easier, I think. All right, so that's it. In class, we're just going to keep practicing, making sure that we can write equations. So we'll add a little bit more to this tomorrow.